Welcome to our bite-sized episodes of the Cardiff Met Sports Coaching Hub podcast, brought to you direct from the CRiC Conference 2024. Enjoy this episode. And I'm joined now by Dr Alex Consterdine. Welcome to the podcast.
Cheers, Mike. Thank you.
So we're starting with introductions, we'll start with success. Just landed yourself a new role at Liverpool John Moores. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you've come about getting that role and what's led you to that point?
Bloody hard work is what it's led to. Seriously, I've been working in higher education for a long number of years now. So started my PhD journey in 2015, coupled that with a part-time teaching role. But it's only now in 2024 that I've landed myself my first permanent contract. And what I'm going to talk about later on is precarity in our sports industry and also in higher education. And I am the lived experience, the lived embodiment of casualisation of labour force, of 0 hours contracts, of the difficulty in finding a permanent position in a very fast-moving and competitive field such as higher education. And that's also mirrored in sports organisations as well. But so I came to it, senior lecturer in sociology of sport, and that came off the back of my PhD, which is in critical sports coaching pedagogy. And I've worked in about 4 higher education institutions before getting this job. But my previous background was in further education. So I did 16 years as a lecturer in various institutions in the UK. But I wanted to branch out and develop my own personal professionalism and knowledge base by challenging myself, doing a master's, which then led to the PhD, which then eventually led to a variety of short-term contracts, some teaching, some research-based. Mm-hmm. And so I found my tribe, which I'm very happy with at Liverpool John Moores.
Perfect. And sport coaching backgrounds, anything there?
Absolutely. I started coaching at the age of 14. In fact, my very first experience was at the Crynol Sager College of Higher Education back in 1990, where I led kids a year younger than me on a young athletes development course run by Cheshire LEA. I wasn't a teacher, I was 14 years old, but that's really what instigated my interest in taking my personal athletics career forwards into coaching. So I've been coaching athletics for a long number of years into my early 20s, and then obviously other things happened. But so I trained as a PE teacher, so my interest in pedagogy went into my PGCE, and I've taken on board lots of other coaching-related modules, practically based as well as theoretical based, at all my institutions, at MMU, at the University of Birmingham, Nottingham-Trent, and now at Liverpool. So even though I teach sociology, I'm still very much centred within the coaching, pedagogy, and delivering on those practical units as well.
Great. Now, as our listeners listen to this particular episode, you will have already done your presentation, but we'll break the fourth wall. Your presentation is actually tomorrow as we record.
Yes.
You mentioned then it's going to be a little bit about precarity.
That's right.
Why don't you give us a slightly fuller view of that? What is it that you're going to be talking about? Feel free to talk about it as if you've already done it for our listeners, if that helps with clarity. But what's tomorrow all about for us?
Tomorrow has come about basically by going back to my PhD data and asking different questions of it. So in some of the presentations that we've already heard about, so Robin Jones, for example, is talking a lot about reusing data that you've had to be ethically sound, really. We generate all this data and we only tend to use little bits of it for our research. So by going back to our original data and then looking at it from a different angle and interrogating it another way, can you then get different things? So tomorrow, what I'll be basically focusing on is this idea of precarity in politics and neoliberalism that's imbued within sort of performance sports organisations. So even though I talk to athletes and coaches, I also talked to a variety of stakeholders. So athletes, systems managers, people working in a high performance sport, people working in athletics governing bodies such as UKA, but also the home country's athletics federations, so Athletics Northern Ireland, Scottish Athletics, England Athletics. So I was really looking at trying to give them a voice in demonstrating how difficult it is to navigate and to exist and to thrive, in that high-pressure sporting situation. We focused a lot of our attention on how hard it is for athletes to navigate those systems of control and to interact with their coach in meaningful and productive ways. But I think it's really, really important to shine a light on the experiences of the administrators and the managers and the people who are actually within those organisations, how they conceive of, the neoliberalist pressures that we're all under, which is where we have quantification of metrics, you live and die by compliance. There are all these pressures on people and systems. And as we move further and further into sort of areas of transparency, we have to show our commitment to the audit culture. And, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We need to be able to, because we're getting public money, we need to show where that money is going. But there's a lot of pressure on staff to deliver on those targets, which the public sees in medals. And so what I'm going to talk about tomorrow is the uncertainty and the pressures on staff. And it's a horrible situation to have to mediate. That high turnover, those short-term contracts, the fact that funding can be pulled at any moment. You don't know what your funding's going to be next year. You don't know if you're going to have a job next year. And you're a high-performing professional in that situation. So I really wanted to give those people a voice into sort of feeding into our conversation about what is it that neoliberalism has ever done for us, and maybe for people to become more sensitive to those nuances. I haven't got the answers. No. That's, I haven't. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to critique the whole of modern society? Well, we are critiquing it, but I don't know what the answers are. Michael, if you've got any suggestions, please let me know.
Absolutely none, I'm afraid. But you've got me just talking there, you've got me thinking about, like you said, that sort of audit culture and this precarity and this high-performance environment. It spans not just in high-performance sport, but in higher education, as you say. So many people will be thinking now about workload models. They'll be thinking about ref returns. They'll be thinking about all these things in their contract, about national student surveys and feedback and student outcome surveys, etc. And yet we sort of, you look at a lot of the research, I suppose, in coaching, but also in sort of education more broadly speaking, and we talk about people having agency and having this sort of, self-fulfillment and this idea of being authentic, and then you have to sort of bend and break around a lot of these quantitative measures and things like that. It's a really challenging place to work, I suppose. So there'll be lots of people resonating with what you're saying there, which I think is great. So now you've said you've sort of gone back into your PhD data and tried to look at it in different ways. Key findings and perhaps, I know you mentioned maybe not recommendations, but any of the themes that are coming out of it that are particularly strong?
I think for me what's become quite apparent is maybe using Foucauldian thought such as governmentality into trying to sort of shine a light and try and understand exactly how people navigate that and deal with those tensions. And you said before, it's a little bit about how the sports administrators, they're almost sort of internalising a lot of these pressures. So there's an entanglement that happens between the institutions, the organs of power, and the individual trying to actually exist within those power dynamics, where you're actually absorbing and taking on, and you've got this untidy entanglement between the individual and the organisation and the state systems of power and all that kind of stuff, and whether or not we're compliant in maintaining those systems. If all lecturers said, no, we're not doing NSS, we're not living and dying by ref, that'd be quite interesting, wouldn't it? To have that wholesale sort of like resistance. We talked about agency just then. I wonder how interesting that might be for some kind of collective action to take place, but that would have to be a brave succession of voices or collaboration between practitioners. And the idea is, well, what happens? What do we do? So if we deconstruct those systems, what do we build in its place?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm interested to know what we do with that one.
Perfect. And so is that the next step then, just to sort of wrap up what we're doing this afternoon? Is that your future direction for your research and your practice?
Right. Well, the next step, I think, is I might even cast my net and ask maybe people and practitioners and academics where else I could go to maybe improve the quality of the data, maybe expand, because I've only used a very small subsection, so 8 interviewees, and it'd be quite nice to be able to weave that in with maybe other stakeholders I've used athletics as a kind of like a vehicle to explore neoliberalism and governmentality, but it might be quite interesting to see where else I could go with that. I mean, ultimately, it might have implications for policy, but also it might be interesting for the organisations themselves to do a period of self-reflection and go, what is it that we want from our workforce? How are we going to challenge dominant discourses? You know, we've had this move towards challenging the only medals count philosophy, moving it towards athlete welfare. Well, let's move it forward and encapsulate coaches and stakeholders within that duty of care, that welfare that we're talking about. So let's expand that a little bit more. And somebody in my research did actually say, wouldn't it be interesting, because the more pressure we put on people, the more we subject them to different systems of control, targets, metrics, all that kind of stuff, the less likely you are to get good results, because people are under so much pressure, they're not given the time to breathe. And this person actually said, if we give our personnel time to breathe, to experiment, to be creative, to make mistakes, yeah, that's a good one for you, you actually get better results. And people are happier, people pull out better performances on the track, off the track, in the office. And who knows, maybe you just need to loosen up a little bit and let people make their mistakes and create their own answer to the questions that we're asking.
Amazing. That is a perfect soundbite, I think, to sort of wrap up that little section. Now, it wouldn't be right of me to have you on the podcast at CRiC without asking you about your role with CRiC as well as a communications officer. Just one question, and I guess this is for listeners, for people from CRiC, not involved in CRiC yet, who've maybe just stumbled upon this episode. What can we do to continue to promote the great work that's coming out of CRiC and all of the academics that are supporting the body?
Well, in terms of what I do with the social media, it's I have a presence, obviously. I represent the organisation and we push things out on LinkedIn, we use X, we encourage sort of interaction. So I'm always asking for people to comment or pose questions to us. You know, we've used this as a springboard to try and get some interactivity going. But it'd be quite interesting for maybe sort of students, PGTs, to get involved in that way. And also for people to not just come along to the conferences, but actually go, well, what can we do with the organisation? It'd be quite nice to get some partnerships going with some other institutions who aren't necessarily part of CRiC at the moment, but who could possibly benefit from having that connection and that partnership and maybe even collaboration and mentorship. Amazing. So with students from other universities.
Okay, perfect. Alex, we're out of time for our bite-sized episodes. We'll definitely have to get you back to talk in a little bit more detail about some of your research and things like that, because no doubt it would be incredibly eye-opening and incredibly informative. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thanks for having me. Nice one.
Thanks for listening. If you want to know a little bit more about CRiC, head to the website cricsportcoaching.com, and you can follow along on Twitter as well at @CRiC_SCR.